It's not every day that you realize one of your old YouTube videos hides such a dark secret. In 2022, I filmed a simple vlog at this river park along the Pacific Crest Trail. And recently, when I rewatched that vlog, it hit me. This exact spot held the answer to a mystery that I was literally in the middle of making a video about today. And the scariest part is that this answer was hiding just out of view from my camera. For decades, police called this case impossible. They tried and ultimately gave up on even solving it. But then, almost 70 years after the mystery started, and 3 years after I filmed my vlog, a random YouTuber named Mayo dove into the river right next to where I had filmed, and he made a discovery that shocked everyone. On Sunday, December 7th, 1958, the Martin family were driving through Oregon's scenic Columbia River Gorge looking for what they called Christmas greenery. They packed into the family station wagon and drove through the woods alongside the Columbia River. About an hour into the drive, they stopped for gas at a place called Dean's Chevron Service Station in the small town of Cascade Locks. It was a crisp December day, and the whole family was really getting into the Christmas spirit. But the kids were starting to get pretty hungry, and so they begged their parents to stop for burgers. And as the family pulled up to the Paradise Snack Bar, they had no way of knowing that the only other people in that restaurant, besides the employees, were definitely on Santa's naughty list, to say the least. Ken and Barbara Martin lived in Portland, Oregon with their 3 daughters, 14-year-old Barbie, 13-year-old Virginia, and their youngest, Susie, who was 11. Ken worked for a local business called Eccles Electric Home Service, and more than anything else, Ken really loved Christmas. He would dress up as Santa Claus and even made these wooden candy cane decorations for his yard and for all of his neighbors. Ken loved Christmas so much that his holiday spirit earned his street the nickname of Candy Cane Lane. Along with the 3 daughters at home, they also had a 28-year-old son named Donald Martin, who lived in New York at this time and was serving in the Navy. But be sure to remember Donald, because even though he's thousands of miles away, this story circles back to him over and over again. On December 7th, the Martins wanted to start their holiday season a little early by going on their Christmas greenery drive. Oh, and if you want to start your holiday season even earlier, consider giving me an early Christmas gift by hitting the subscribe button right now. This channel's ultimate goal has always been to reach 1 million subscribers, and we're getting pretty close. So please hit subscribe right now, especially if you are a repeat viewer. As I mentioned before, the family stopped for gas before stopping for food, and a waitress at the Paradise Snack Bar in the town of Hood River confirmed that she waited on the Martin family late Sunday afternoon. The waitress said they'd arrived from the east in their Ford station wagon, ate hamburgers, fries, and dessert, and then left about an hour or so afterwards and headed west back towards Portland. Notably, the waitress was 100% sure that the family she served was the Martin family because they were basically her only customers that day. Well, actually, except for 2 mysterious men who were also dining in the restaurant at the exact same time. This story is about to take some wild turns, and before I tell you about who these mysterious men were, I want to mention the reason I'm even able to make these videos in the first place. If you're a fan of the channel and you want to help ensure we can continue making these videos, and you want to make some cash on the side, please join me in supporting TesterUp. If your phone is in your hand right now, it could be making you money. The app is called TesterUp, and they're the sponsor of today's video. And by the way, if that sounds too good to be true, I totally get it. I didn't even believe it at first, but I'm telling you, it's not. TesterUp literally pays you to test apps. It's super simple. First, you sign up. It's free and it only takes about a minute. Then you pick an app to test from the list. And finally, you complete the tasks that it shows, maybe play a game for a bit or answer a few questions, and then you cash out. Think of it as swapping 10 minutes of doom scrolling for 10 minutes that actually pays you money. Same phone, same thumb, way different outcome. Again, it's totally free, registration is quick, and payouts hit your bank within 24 hours. And some app tests pay up to $90 each. And by the way, there are over 1 million users. I'm telling you, this is not some random sketchy thing. There's new tasks popping up all the time, and so there's almost always something fresh to try. And so if you want to turn idle screen time and doom scrolling into a little bit of side cash, Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to jump in and start earning today. I know that you're going to be spending time scrolling or playing games on your phone today anyways, and so one more time, click the link in the description or scan the QR code and go earn yourself a bit of extra cash. Okay, now let's get back into this crazy story. As the Martin family laughed and filled up on burgers and fries, there were two strange men sitting just a few tables away, eating in silence in the otherwise empty restaurant. Their names were Lester Price and Roy Light, and they were both ex-convicts. The waitress said that Price and Light both left the Paradise Snack Bar shortly after the Martins did, and that they were heading in the same direction, almost as if they were following them. And as you'll see, the details and the timestamps in this story are a little bit more like rough estimates, especially compared to some other stories I've covered, which makes it harder to investigate. But most sources I could find, including the restaurant owner, agree that both the Martin family and the ex-cons left between 4:15 and 4:30 p.m. Another local couple named Kelsey and Doris Knutson were also out for a sightseeing drive in the gorge that day. As they drove west down the highway, Kelsey and Doris were passed by a light-colored station wagon, just like the one that the Martin family was in, at around 4:30 p.m. The couple remembered remarking to each other that the station wagon had been going way too fast, almost like the people inside the car were trying to run from something. And then something even weirder happened about 20 minutes later when Kelsey and Doris passed an area in Cascade Locks right under the famous Bridge of the Gods. As they passed by the bridge, they recognized that the very same station wagon they had seen earlier was now pulled over to the side of the road. And this confused them. One moment it seemed like this station wagon was in such a hurry, and then suddenly, just a few moments later, it had stopped in like a random spot. And the couple noticed something else that made the situation even stranger. There were two men standing outside of the car. The two men were clearly talking to the people inside of the vehicle, but it wasn't clear if the conversation was positive or negative or aggressive or whatever. They couldn't tell. The couple kept driving, and that was the last time that they ever saw this mysterious station wagon. And so, did that chaotic car belong to the Martin family? And who were the strange men standing next to the car? Could it have been the two ex-cons, Lester Price and Roy Light? Questions like these persisted as the sun went down on that peaceful Sunday, and then even more questions came up as the sun rose the next morning, Monday, December 8th. Now, back in Portland, Oregon, Ken Martin's boss noticed that Ken hadn't come into work for the week. And Ken was always on time, and so this was not like him to just skip work, or at least to skip it and not call in with a reason, right? His boss was very, very worried. And that very same morning, the teachers at Rose City School marked Susan and Virginia absent for the day. The school also hadn't gotten a call to explain why the girls weren't in class that particular day. None of this made any sense at all for the Martin family. Ken's sister was actually a teacher at Rose City School, and so she called the Martin family home to check on her nieces, but of course, nobody picked up. And she called over and over, by the way, and she never got an answer. As the calls went on, she was getting more and more worried. Something was obviously wrong here, and so she decided to call the front office at Grant High, which is where Barbie went to school, and they told her that Barbie hadn't come to class that day either. This was obviously extremely troubling, but Ken's sister, Charlotte, didn't go into full panic mode yet. She wanted to talk to her husband first, and she also wanted to get a hold of the Martins' eldest son, Donald, to see if he had heard anything from them at all. Maybe Donald knew something that nobody else did. That very same day, Ken's boss told his wife about Ken's absence at work, and then she told a mutual friend, Mrs. Lenz, that the Martins were missing. Mrs. Lenz was a woman of action, and so she didn't waste any time at all before she called the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office to report the Martin family missing. Finally, someone was doing it. That night, Officer Fred Ruddick took Mrs. Lenz's call and recorded all of the information that she gave him. The sheriff's office sent several cars out to the Larch Mountain area in the Columbia River Gorge, and he sent another officer to the Martin family home. And when the officer arrived at the house and searched the grounds, it was completely dark and empty. Just one day earlier, it was bright and full of life, all these children running around, but now it might as well have been abandoned. Ken's sister Charlotte and her husband came over to let the police into the house, and as they all stepped inside, they were met with, I don't even know how to, like a incredibly weird smell. And so they followed their noses, and the smell only got stronger as they got closer to the kitchen. Charlotte was getting sick, and the closer she got to the kitchen, the more this sickening feeling intensified. I mean, what could this smell possibly be? As the group of officers entered the kitchen, they finally got the answer. The sink was filled with dirty dishes, and ground beef had been left on the counter, thawing out. And look, I'm not the cleanest guy in the world, but I can confidently say that I've never left the house with raw meat left out on the counter. I mean, that's a wild move. Even if you thought you'd be home a little sooner, I guess, but I don't know, it's the 1950s, so I'll give them a pass for not being the most food safe people of all time. After finding the state of the kitchen, the officers and Charlotte were obviously a little relieved that they didn't discover any, rotting corpses in the house. But that tiny bit of relief was immediately replaced by even more fear. And I say that because it was clear by the scene at the house that the Martin family had fully planned on coming home, but instead they were nowhere to be found. And so by the next day, the search was on. Hundreds of people searched for the family up and down the highway and throughout the Columbia River Gorge, from law enforcement officers to Forest Servicemen to friends, relatives, and other volunteers. One report even estimated that over 1,000 people were out looking for the Martins. Within days, several witnesses had called to report seeing an abandoned white Chevrolet near the highway between Cascade Locks and the Paradise Snack Bar. And this is where we meet a man named Detective Walter Graven. Graven worked in the area, and he was at the forefront of this entire investigation. When he ran the license plate to this mysterious car, he discovered that the abandoned car had been stolen from a man who lived in Los Angeles. And when police asked the owner of the car who he thought might have taken it, he gave them one name, which was Lester Price. Sound familiar? That's right. One of the ex-convicts from the restaurant just so happened to abandon a sketchy car along the same stretch of road where the Martins had been last seen. A detective that was interviewed at the time called this discovery, quote, the single most important clue in the Martin family case. Clearly, Lester and Roy were both prime suspects, or at the very least, people of extreme interest in this case. And when Detective Graven dug into the two ex-convicts, it turns out they had friends in Los Angeles that vouched for the fact that they were both in LA on December 9th, seemingly proving that they couldn't have been in Portland on the evening of December 7th when all this went down. But when Detective Graven started asking around the area, he met a local brothel owner who said otherwise. The brothel owner said that Lester and Roy had actually visited his establishment multiple times between December 7th and December 10th. And after that, the brothel owner said that he hadn't seen either of the two men since. It's also important to note that Roy Light had once worked at an aluminum plant in the town of Cascade Locks, and that he had also allegedly carjacked a woman by hiding in her backseat under a blanket until she got back to her car, which is creepy. Wow. And so now we can somewhat accurately place these two very sketchy, dangerous men with questionable alibis in the exact same place as the Martin family on the day that they disappeared. But can we actually prove that they were the reason the family was missing? I know one thing for sure, which is that Detective Graven sure wanted to. A week later, on December 16th, the investigation took a brand new turn, this time towards the Martins' oldest son, Donald. Detective Graven paid a visit to one of Donald's old employers, and while there, he learned that Donald's history with the store stretched back to the late 40s, when Donald began as a stock boy before eventually leaving to join the Navy. Donald returned in the early 50s, then left again, and then was later rehired in the mid-50s, only to be fired for stealing more than $2,000 worth of goods. When Donald was caught stealing, he was arrested, and he told police that he was having a hard time at home. And this gets weird, but apparently that's where he revealed that he was gay and that his parents didn't approve of his sexuality. But even though they allegedly didn't approve of him, Ken and Barbara Martin still helped their son get out of trouble by paying the store back for all the stolen goods and getting Donald released. Detective Graven was interested in Donald both because of his estrangement from his parents and his previous arrest, but also because Donald never came home to search for his missing family. Again, Donald lived in New York at this time, and his whole family had just vanished, and he still couldn't be bothered to help look for them. Authorities were only able to interview him over the phone, which is very bizarre. And I know that Donald was in the Navy, but I couldn't find anything that said they wouldn't give him leave, or if he even requested time off to go home and was denied. I just have to imagine that the Navy would be able to find like a weekend or something for him to return to Portland when his family disappeared, right? And to make matters even worse, Detective Graven looked a little closer at the list of stuff Donald was accused of stealing from his former employee, and there was just one item that he could not ignore. That was a .38 caliber Colt Commander pistol. And I want you to hold on to that bombshell for just a second. I promise I'm going to get right back to it. But first, I need to tell you about a man named Theodore Hellier. Theodore was wandering through a wooded area just west of Cascade Locks in January of 1959 when something caught his eye. This mysterious object glimmered when the sunlight hit it, and even though it was under some rocks and brush, Theodore just had to investigate it. He wondered if it was like a rare coin or maybe it was just some random metal garbage. But as he bent over and began to dig it up, he discovered not a coin or a Pepsi can. He discovered a gun, and not just any gun. It was a .38 caliber Colt Commander. And so Theodore looked a little bit closer and he realized that the gun had dried blood smeared across the handle, and that part of the gun had been damaged and dented, almost as if it was used to like hit somebody, right? Only one of the 9 bullets in the gun had been fired, and the shell casing of the bullet that was fired was still jammed in the cylinder. And so Theodore took this crazy discovery and did what you're supposed to do, right? He took the weapon straight to the sheriff's office. He expected the gun would be logged as evidence, and he wondered if it was somehow connected to the missing Martin family or just to some other criminal case, right? But instead, the sheriff refused to treat the gun as evidence. For some insane reason, the sheriff decided to just clean the gun, scrubbing off all of the dried blood, all of the fingerprints, all of the evidence, and simply gave it back to Theodore. Investigators would later say that the sheriff likely didn't see the gun as connected to the Martin family, but still, you'd think that the police would file away a bloody gun no matter what, and at least try to learn something about it, but not in this case. That's not what happened at all. The sheriff's department might as well have had a big sign outside their office that said, "Mystery gun cleaners are us." And honestly, to me, this is the point where the story of the Martin family disappearance stopped looking like an actual disappearance and started almost looking like some sort of cover-up. However, there was one shocking detail that survived the sheriff's cleanup of this gun, and that was the serial number. When Detective Graven learned about this gun, he realized that the serial number matched that of the firearm stolen by Donald Martin from his former employer. When he confronted Donald Martin with all of this evidence, like his old stolen gun resurfacing near where his entire family went missing, Donald's answer only deepened the mystery. He said, quote, "Police told me about the gun being found. I have no knowledge of it." Donald went on to blame an old friend of his in Portland who was named Wayne. And just a side note here, Wayne's last name has never been released, at least as far as I could find. He's simply known as Wayne in all the news and case files, which is unfortunate because just going by one name is usually reserved for people like LeBron or Madonna. But I guess if you're going to have the name Wayne, you might as well try to be the Wayne. And no offense to anyone who might be named Wayne, of course. If you are, leave a comment below. Wayne worked with Donald Martin at the employer that Donald had stolen from, and he also knew the rest of the Martin family pretty well, too. Donald said that, quote, "Wayne liked guns. I didn't." And this quote seems to suggest that Wayne stole the gun in the first place and that Donald might have taken the blame for him. And it's safe to say that even more rumors and theories like these were running wild around this case, including even more theories that pointed directly at Donald. Detective Graven kept a detailed notebook for the entire investigation, But there was actually one very weird note that, for some reason, he didn't want anybody else to see. He wanted to hide this note so badly that he actually wrote it down and then crossed part of it out. And the note said, quote, "It had to be unlegible, no one else with motive." After Graven's death, someone actually took his notes into Photoshop and were able to reveal what was hidden behind the unlegible part of that note, his scribbled ink, if you will. It said Donald, which means the quote is presumed to have said, "It had to be Donald, no one else with motive." But if the leading detective for this case was so convinced that Donald had done it, why would he have ultimately crossed Donald's name out? I mean, this didn't really make much sense. One of the biggest reasons that Graven was so focused on Donald Martin was because he knew that Donald was set to inherit the entire Martin family estate, along with a big insurance payout. In his mind, that was clearly enough motive for an estranged son to do something awful to his family. Also, going back to when Donald was caught stealing from his employer, he claimed that he was a homosexual, which I personally don't really think is a defense for stealing, but to each their own. And he went on to say that his mom was, quote, "a fat slob," and that his father, quote, "wasn't much better." Donald went on and said that he was afraid that his sisters would be, quote, "just like them," which is not so good, and it certainly doesn't look very good for Donald. But with all of that said, the authorities were never able to prove his clear involvement, since he was all the way in New York at the time of the disappearance. But that doesn't mean he never enlisted the help of a friend, maybe even a friend like Wayne. Donald kept talking about his friend Wayne when asked about the gun, but Wayne reportedly said in a 2008 interview that he had been in Cascade Locks on the afternoon of the family's disappearance and that he was busy teaching a PE class. Now, I have no idea what kind of PE class he would have been teaching on Sunday afternoon, but that was his alibi, and I guess the authorities in the case generally accepted it. And so if Donald and Wayne weren't involved in the disappearance, then what the hell happened to the Martins? Is it possible that maybe all this foul play talk is nonsense and maybe it was just a freak accident? During the search, a Portland man named Donald Bain spent time driving up and down the highway searching for clues about the Martin family when all of a sudden he discovered some strange tire tracks in a parking lot in Cascade Locks. As he's looking down at these tracks, he begins to wonder if a car had actually skidded off the side of the cliff and plunged down into the frigid water below. And that seems pretty reasonable, especially with the discovery of those tracks. But the authorities dismissed this idea because they didn't think that the parking lot was near any Christmas greenery, and they didn't think that the Martins would have gone there. But when Detective Graven returned to that cliffside for a closer look at the tire tracks, he also found paint chips that he sent back to an FBI crime lab for analysis, and those results confirmed that the paint belonged to the same make and model and paint scheme of the Martin family car. It was becoming increasingly apparent that the station wagon fell into the Columbia River somehow. And if you think about it, it makes sense. How else could a car full of people just fully vanish? Maybe this was just a freakish, tragic accident. Or maybe there was nothing accidental about it at all. All of those questions would drift up and down the Columbia River Gorge for months on end, at least until May 1st, 1959. On that day, an oil boat was floating down the Columbia River near Bonneville Dam when it dropped an anchor and heard a great big thud. Almost instantly, the crew recognized that they'd hit something on the bottom of the river, and by the sound it made, they believed that they'd hit something big and made of steel. They couldn't see it, but they even attempted to drop their anchor again and use it as a hook to pull up this mysterious metal thing, whatever it was. They did manage to even get a hold of it for a brief moment, but as they were reeling it in, right before it got to the surface, it fell off the anchor and sank right back down to the bottom. Whatever it was almost as if it truly didn't want to be discovered. It would rather stay buried at the bottom of the mighty Columbia. 2 days later, on May 3rd, just before noon, a local boat captain was working on the river near the Crown Zellerbach paper factory in Camas, Washington, when he noticed some strange debris floating along with all the logs for the paper mill. As he got closer, he noticed what looked like grimy clothing. And then he saw a tiny pair of shoes and his heart sank. He realized that this wasn't your normal kind of river debris. It was the body of a young girl. The captain immediately called the sheriff, and another man who worked on the boat helped to drag the body out of the river. The sheriff instantly recognized the girl's clothing as matching the Martin family daughters, but he was also pretty confused by the fact that the body was found so far from where the family had been last seen. Camas is basically 40 miles downriver from Cascade Locks. This was also strange, and it didn't really make sense, but one thing was for sure, and that was that the body was not supposed to be where they found it. The body was brought to Vancouver, Washington, where Ken's sister's husband came to help identify it. And when he arrived, he prepared himself to have to see one of his young nieces in a horrifying state, but he was shocked to see that the river had broken down the victim's face so much that it was completely unrecognizable. And so, heartbreakingly, he couldn't actually help determine if this young girl was actually one of the Martins' daughters. It wasn't until the body was brought to the coroner's office for an official autopsy that dental records were finally able to identify the youngest Martin girl, Susie. The news of the discovery of Susie's body started to spread fast, and at around 11:15 in the morning the very next day, a man was working near the Bonneville Dam when he also noticed something floating in the river. Just like the previous man, he initially thought it could have been just debris or trash, but when his coworkers helped him pull it out of the water, they could not believe what they had found. It was the body of another young girl, which is insane. Like 1 minute they were all reading the news about the Martin case, and then suddenly they were living in the news. They were the news, or their discovery was at least. Now, this particular girl was wearing jeans, a sweatshirt, and a white shirt. And this little detail just totally broke my heart when I heard it, but they even found an M&M wrapper in her pocket, which I don't know why, but that just so innocent. And ultimately, dental records would confirm this body as that of Virginia Martin, the middle Martin daughter. Oh man, I've gotten pretty good at telling these stories, but this is one of those details where it's just it hits. It hits hard. There's no easy way to say this stuff. They found Virginia about 25 miles upriver from where Susie was found, which once again made the authorities wonder where exactly the Martin car had gone into the water. And they also wondered about that mysterious steel object that the oil boat had hit with its anchor around Bonneville Dam. Did they think that the anchor had grabbed onto the Martin family car at the bottom of the river? And maybe when they tried to pull it up, it caused the bodies of young Susie and Virginia to come loose and float down the river. When the autopsies came back, Susie and Virginia's causes of deaths were both determined to be drowning. There was no evidence of any injury, and they had determined that they didn't think either body had been floating on the surface of the water for very long. This next part's disgusting, so maybe skip ahead a couple seconds, but you good? Okay. They did find evidence of hamburgers and potatoes in their stomachs, which lines up with the story that the waitress told about seeing the family back at the Paradise Snack Bar the day that they went missing. So all of that lines up with some of the evidence we already had, but here's where the information from the autopsy starts to get really weird. So a deputy sheriff told a journalist that he had photographed and fingerprinted both girls, and he said that, quote, both girls had holes in their skulls behind their right ears. I thought they were either from a gunshot or a blow. Which, hold on for a minute. Initially, the cause of death was drowning. That's what I just told you. But suddenly, we have this guy telling us that he possibly saw gunshot wounds in both girls' heads. I mean, why on earth would the autopsy leave out a detail like that? Everything gets super muddy here because the medical examination and all the other evidence obviously does not have those holes noted. And we just have the one deputy sheriff's random quote from an interview. And apparently there was an author who wrote a book about this case and reported seeing the photos the deputy claimed to have taken, but they said the picture was too small and blurry to see whether or not Virginia actually had a hole in her head. Both girls' remains were cremated, and so there's no way to check on this now. And so Personally, I'm inclined to trust the official autopsy, but this clear discrepancy still makes me question everything else in this case a little bit more. It's just so strange. Like, first they cleaned the blood off the gun and dismissed it, and now they can't seem to agree on the facts of the autopsies. And so again, I'm like, is this some sort of cover-up, or is it just pure incompetence? I mean, I don't know. After the girls' bodies were discovered, search crews were right back out in the area with boats, helicopters, and cars. They focused on scanning the 5 miles between Cascade Locks and the Bonneville Dam, just upriver from where they'd found Virginia. They dragged the bottom of the Columbia and searched with grappling hooks, but they weren't able to find the Martin family car, or Ken, or Barbara, or Barbie Martin either. The case would go cold all over again, and that's exactly how it would stay for over 66 years, until a man named Archer Mayo would make a shocking discovery earlier this year, as of the time of this recording, in March of 2025. Now, at the beginning of the video, I called Archer a YouTuber, but the truth is that he's much more than that. Archer is an amateur investigator, and he's also a professional sculptor and diver. Archer was insanely passionate about the Martin case, and he devoted tons of time and energy, years, to pinpointing the exact spot where he thought the Martins might have driven into the water. I'm telling you guys, he had been obsessed with this case since 2018, and after poring over all of the evidence, he was convinced that the foul play theories were flat out wrong. Archer didn't think that Donald, Wayne, or the ex-cons, he didn't think that any of them were responsible, and he was hell-bent on proving that fact. One day, Archer found himself looking through the archives at the Oregon Historical Society, and as he looked at a late 1800s photo of the construction of Cascade Locks, just upstream from where Virginia Martin's body was recovered, he noticed something. The photo showed that engineers had dug a massive pit into the bottom of the river. And Archer thought that after decades of searching with zero luck, that rescue crews likely had no idea that a pit was even there. And to make things even more damning, this pit was just downstream from the parking lot where the tire tracks and paint chips were found years earlier. Archer also figured that the pit likely would have pulled in anything heavy that might have kind of floated over it. And so he was now convinced that pit is where the Martins' car must be. Today, this pit, this spot in the river, is located just offshore of Cascade Locks Marine Park. I mean, not very far offshore at all, actually. And it just so happens to be a spot that I've visited 2 times over the past few years to attend the PCT Trail Days Festival. They hold it right there in the park, right next to where this pit is. The park and this surrounding spot here is just incredibly beautiful. And actually, rather than describe it to you, I'm just gonna show you. Anyways, as I was saying, and as you can actually see now, the park here is beautiful, right in downtown Cascade Locks. And it's right here, right where I'm pointing, right by that wooden offhang thing there, that Archer was convinced the answer to the Martin family mystery was hidden. Right there. He spent months getting all the necessary permits and permissions to do a dive of this kind, and then he did 60 different dives to clear debris from the pit with a dredge, all in hopes that his measurements and predictions were correct. And then, in late 2024, Archer dipped beneath the surface right there and made the most important dive of his entire life. When he ultimately took his camera beneath the cold, murky waters of the Columbia River, he pointed his lens towards the shadowy depths of the mysterious pit and tried to focus on exactly what he was looking at through the darkness. Above the surface, the mighty river flowed like an unstoppable force, but in this deep underwater graveyard, it was almost as if time had completely gone still. As Archer dove deeper and deeper, the water got colder, but he also started to feel a much different kind of chill. He searched and searched, he peered deep into the void, and at first he didn't really see much of anything, but suddenly a strange shape began to form. It was big, and it clearly had been there for a long, long time. It also had a random series of letters and numbers on the front of it. Archer's heart raced as he tried to figure out what he was actually looking at. He then started to read 1G7. This sequence of numbers and letters was familiar to Archer. He paused for a moment to kind of collect himself, and then he read the final 3 numbers. 1, 5, 9. Archer's heart sank as he realized that all of his hard work and countless hours had finally paid off. He had come face to face with the Martin family's license plate. On March 7th, 2025, after nearly 70 years, a recovery crew arrived with a crane to pull fragments of the Martin family's station wagon out of the river. Unfortunately, the cabin of the car just refused to move. And my understanding is that it's still down in the river to this day. And despite this groundbreaking discovery of the vehicle, the remains of Ken, Barbara, and Barbie were not found with the station wagon, and they remained missing. But that would soon change. On August 22nd, 2025, just a few months, before the recording of this video, Archer announced that he had done another dive, and this time he had located what he believes are the remains of Ken and Barbara, and even possibly Barbie. He also discovered numerous items belonging to the family, including clothing, shoes, toys, and cameras. Now, my understanding is that the authorities have not officially confirmed these discoveries yet, but at this point, my opinion is that Archer is way more of an expert on this case than even the authorities are, and so I'm certainly going to believe him. Archer, this private citizen, was basically able to solve a case that the police and the authorities could not solve for decades and decades. And I believe that he's going to be publishing a book about his journey at some point. And so I've linked his website and his YouTube channel below. Go check out those links, and please show Archer some love in the comments because what he has done is incredible. I have so much respect for him. Donald Martin lived the rest of his life under a cloud of suspicion until he passed away in 2004, unfortunately years before his family's car was discovered. He would go on to have 4 kids, but apparently he never told them much about what happened to their grandparents and aunts who went missing, so many years earlier. I called this case basically solved just a few seconds ago, and I said that for a reason. The car has been discovered, most likely most of the bodies have been discovered, and so we certainly know more than we did, for the previous almost 70 years. But despite Archer's discoveries, we still don't have all the answers as to what happened. Were the Martins attacked by the ex-convicts, their own son, or was it a total accident? And how do we explain the weird mistakes that made the whole thing look like a cover-up? Like the cops cleaning a bloody gun, or the girls' autopsies having those inconsistencies. And for whatever it's worth, I personally side with Archer Mayo's opinion, which is that it was just an accident. I mean, he worked so hard in this case, and he found results that not even the government or the authorities could ever find after decades of searching. And so I strongly believe him, basically. I mean, he's the foremost expert on this case. But regardless of what happened, my heart goes out to the Martin family and to everyone who ever loved them and searched for them. If you enjoyed this video, YouTube seems to think you'll like this one next, and so give it a click. Thank you for watching, and I hope everyone stays safe out there.